What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Light and Lamp Podcast. I am here with Steve,
Hello.
as always, and this is our pre, technically pre-trade deadline, catching up on a lot of the trades that have happened before the actual deadline day, which is tomorrow. Just for reference, this is being recorded on March 20th at around 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So there will be trades that will break after this episode is recorded before it's uploaded. So just keep that in mind. And then next week we'll do a full wrap up of the trade deadline when it's fully passed. We usually record like Wednesdays or Thursdays, so just keep that in mind as far as what's happening. So even though this episode might go up on Monday, this is counts as the week of the episode for the week of the 13th. So just keep that in mind. So anyway, all that to say, there's been a lot of crazy nonsense going on. We'll start with the kind of first. I guess we can start with the Frank Vetrano deal, just as a little bit of a kickoff. And then obviously after that, like the Ben Sherratt deal is like the first major piece to move, and then obviously everything that would go on. So Frank Vetrano goes from the Florida Panthers for a fourth round pick, which is conditional. At the time of the trade, the Rangers own their own fourth round pick and Winnipeg's fourth round pick. The pick that goes to the Panthers for this year's draft will be whichever one is the lower of the two, and the Rangers acquire Frank Vetrano. So basically, Frank Vetrano straight up for a fourth round pick with some conditions attached to it. Vetrano is a 28-year-old. He's currently on the last year of a 3-year, $2.5 million deal. So he is a unrestricted free agent after this season. From a Rangers fan perspective, why don't you go ahead and just give me your thoughts on this trade?
I thought it was an all right trade. We needed some depth up front, and I think it added. I don't know if he's kind of fits what we were talking about, considering he's a little more on the undersized side, but it still addresses adding something up front. But I still think the Rangers are going to be more active at the deadline than just this move. At least I would hope so.
There's a lot of things to take into account when it comes to, what we expect to see out of the Rangers. Obviously, they have a lot of cap space right now because we were just talking about how broken the cap space system actually is. We don't understand how it works. They will not have $33 million in cap space come the end of the season, I don't think, because I think the way you accrue it over the course of a season or something.
Yeah, it's some weird shit, honestly.
According to Cap Friendly, during this offseason, they're going to have about $10 million to sign players. So they still have wiggle room. They still have room to make trades. I don't think that they'll be going ahead and making anything of the likes of just to throw out another trade that happened, like the Hampus Lindholm deal, where they end up just signing some dude to an 8-year contract right after trading for him.
Oh yeah, no way. I don't think so either.
But apparently they're in the market for a right-handed defenseman, so we'll see what happens with that. I think this is a good trade for the Rangers. They need some depth, and it's just insurance. In case somebody gets hurt in the playoffs, in case somebody goes down with an injury or has to miss time, whatever. Kind of bolsters up that third line, considering the Rangers have had some of their depth players injured this year. Sammy Blais is still on IR. Capo Caco is still on IR. Kevin Rooney is still on IR. So, some guys that were bouncing up and around between the middle six, the second and third line are out and have been out for a significant period of time. So, and obviously for the Panthers, this was just to shed some salary cap in order for them to make some moves, which, boy, howdy, have they been making moves.
Oh yeah,
we'll slap on over to this next deal here. The Florida Panthers, on the same day as trading away Frank Vetrano, turned around and traded for defenseman Ben Sherratt from the Montreal Canadiens. Ben Sherratt is a 30-year-old defenseman on the last year of a $3.5 million deal. Montreal retains half his salary, so $1.75 million onto the books for the Panthers. And the Canadians get Ty Smilanek. I don't know really how to say his name. I apologize.
I don't either, to be honest.
A fourth round pick, which is conditional, and which was the Rangers pick. So Montreal gets whatever one is lower of the Rangers or the Jets pick, which at this point looks like it's going to be the Rangers pick, and a conditional first round pick, which is top 10 protected. In the event that the Panthers retain their 2022 first, they won't. They're not. That pick in no way, shape, or form is going to be a top 10 pick. They will no
Oh
longer
no.
own their 2023 first round pick. So unless something astronomically stupid happens where the Panthers miss the playoffs and then win like the 2.5% lottery pick, yeah, they traded away their first round pick essentially for Ben Sherratt, who has not yet been signed to it's a
Extension.
2023 first round pick. What, the Panthers first round pick in 20? Okay, so it's a 2022 first that's protected. Wait,
Okay, that makes sense.
no, okay, I think there's a typo on Cap Friendly. Sorry guys, I'm just reading this. I think there's a typo. I believe it's the 2023 first that would then become a 2024 first if it was top 10. So there, I guess, if the wheels completely fall off in Florida next season, they could transfer their 2024 first. But anyway,
Yeah.
uh, so this trade came before the news of, or before the events that transpired where Aaron Ekblad again had an awkward fall and had to leave a game. I'm going to really quickly look for an update on him, but while I look for that update, if there's anything, um, do you have any, or what are your thoughts about this trade for the Florida Panthers? If I could find Ben Sherratt, or I'm going to look for Aaron Ekblad here. Hold on, guys. Sorry, there's a very, very professional podcast here. I'm struggling to type in the name Aaron Ekblad. So it says, okay, so Aaron Ekblad was placed on LTIR and will not play again during the regular season. It says he should be able to return for the first round of the playoffs. So, obviously the Panthers made this trade before this went down, but again, just another like super unfortunate incident for Aaron Ekblad. This similar thing happened last year shortly around the trade deadline. He had that leg injury where he unfortunately was not able to come back at all, even in the playoffs last year for the Florida Panthers, whereas this year it's saying, that it looks like he is expected to return for the first round of the playoffs.
Which I mean, hopefully they do because they need a guy like that if they're going to compete in this Atlantic Division.
So it turns out to be obviously a really, really good trade to not that Ben Sherratt is equivalent to Aaron Ekblad, obviously, but like, what do you make of this trade in light of the injury to Aaron Ekblad that came shortly after?
I mean, I think the trade it's a fair trade. I don't know if Florida's going to be able to hold on to Ben Sherratt, but it's definitely worth taking a shot on him in a rental capacity just because you always need to add depth, specifically at the blue line when it comes to playoff time. And now, I mean, you see why, right? Aaron Ekblad goes down with like another awkward injury, like you said. And I don't know if he's going to necessarily eat or replace Ekblad in any sort of comparable way in terms of ice time or anything in these games going forward, but it'll definitely help them that they won't have to throw, a rookie defenseman or somebody who's really out of their water or out of their weight class into his position on like the penalty kill or even like 5-on-5 if they have to.
Yeah, certainly. And another thing kind of taking into account here is he's the kind of defenseman that you really want in the playoffs. He's kind of a hard checking defensive defenseman, does his job. You don't really got to worry too much about him when you throw him out there. He's been there, done that. I mean, he brings 56 games of playoff experience to the table for a Florida Panthers team, which has a mix of guys that do have some playoff experience and some guys that don't. And I think the defense, if you specifically look at it from the defensive aspect, without Aaron Ekblad, The defense is Brandon Montour, Mackenzie Weegar, Gustav Forsling, Radko Gudas, Robert Haig, and then Lucas Carlson and Petteri Lindbaum. That's not exactly terrible, but it's not really something you would expect to see of a Stanley Cup contending roster. But you add Ben Sherrod in there, and I think it looks a little bit better. And then specifically come playoff time, you add Aaron Ekblad back in there, and it looks really good.
Yeah, and then you're really set to go.
And Florida's all in. I mean, Florida does not have a first-round pick for the next 3 years. They don't have their 2022 first, they don't have their 2023 first, and they don't have their 2024 first.
I mean,
So,
you kind of have to go all in, right? With the way they've been playing this year, they have almost no reason not to.
and, we'll stick on the Florida Panthers. We'll just run through their next two trades. They also traded for Robert Haig from the Buffalo Sabres for a sixth-round pick. And they traded the big one, obviously, that everyone knows, Claude Giroux. Half of his salary was retained by the Philadelphia Flyers, so they traded for Claude Giroux, German Rubstov, Connor Bunneman, and a fifth-round pick for Owen Tippett, a third and 2024 first-round pick, which is conditional. And if that pick turns out to be a top 10 pick, Philadelphia will instead receive the 2025 first-round pick. So Florida, in short order, traded away Frank Vetrano in order to acquire Ben Sherratt, acquire Robert Haig, and acquire Claude Giroux. Obviously, the Claude Giroux trade is a really big one, so let's really kind of dive into this. What do you think this does for this Florida Panthers team, bringing in a guy like Claude Giroux?
I mean, I think it's a signal more than anything else, right, to the rest of the Atlantic Division that these guys are for real, or at least they think they are, that they're looking to actually compete this year. And anytime you can add a forward who's got the track record and the pedigree of somebody like uh, Claude Giroux to a forward group that already includes Alexander Barkov, Jonathan Huberdeau, guys like that, I mean, it can only be a good thing.
Yeah. Whoa, almost just had a weird moment there. And Claude Giroux brings 85 games of playoff experience. He's been there, done that. The only thing he hasn't done is won a Stanley Cup. I mean, he went all the way to the Stanley Cup Finals with them in 2010 before ultimately losing to the Chicago Blackhawks. 73 points in 85 playoff games, 900 points in 1,000 regular season games. Absolutely nothing to sneeze at in either one of those. And he brings veterancy, he brings leadership. He was the captain of the Philadelphia Flyers for how long?
A lot of years.
And I mean, this forward group is like ridiculously stacked at this point. You have Claude Giroux, Sam Reinhart, Barkov, Huberdeau, Sam Bennett, Patrick Hornquist, Anthony Duclair, and then you have your depth guys like Noel Acciari, Carter Verhaeghe, Anton Lundell, even like Joe Thornton is still playing in Florida. Like,
And he's still producing at a pretty, not significant clip, but I mean, he's not a problem for them, even at 44 years old.
and so I guess to the other side of the equation, is it over in Philadelphia? Is this kind of the signal that this is the death knell and we're ready to, I guess, rebuild again, even though they just finished rebuilding not that long ago?
Yeah, I mean, if nothing else, it's the end of it's the end of that early 2010s team, right? Because Voracek and Giroux were the last two guys remaining from that team that went to that 2010 final. Actually, I don't even know if Voracek was there for that, but
It's just,
I mean,
when you take a look at this team, they do have some guys that, they're stuck with Ryan Ellis, for until
yeah,
2026, 2027. He's already 31. Couturier next year is in the first year of his contract extension. Scott Lawton is under contract until 2026. Rasmus Ristolainen, they just, they signed a contract extension with him, until 2026, 2027. Joel Farabee's on the team until 2027, 2028. I mean, Farabee's young, he's only 22, but, JVR's 32, Atkinson's 32. This team is in a very awkward spot, isn't it? Where we have, a a lot of 27 to 28-year-olds who should be playing meaningful hockey, but they're
Are kind of
not.
just stuck now. Yeah. I mean, yeah, yeah, they are kind of stuck, but I think in the coming years, some of those contracts aren't so bad that they can't be moved. But I mean, it really felt like this year Philly was trying to, based on all the moves they made in the preseason or the off season into the preseason, were really signifying that they wanted to compete in a big way in the Metro, and you know, the wheels kind of fell off on that this year. So yeah, they're kind of stuck in a weird. They're going to be in a weird spot where I think they're going to be too good to get like top five picks, but not bad enough to, they're not good enough to get into the playoffs, at least for the next couple of years. Because it's not like they have bad players on the team. Like, they just have, I don't know what's wrong in Philly, honestly, but like on paper, it's not a bad team.
It's gonna be weird, to your point. Do you think is it apt to kind of say that they're just like now the new age Minnesota Wild, or not even well new age, but like they're now the next Minnesota Wild, where
I
like
would say so, where they're kind of stuck in between.
they're just like stuck in neutral.
Yeah, I think, and they will be for the next couple of years too, unfortunately, for Flyers fans.
So, what do you make of the value on this trade, on the Claude Giroux trade?
I mean, they got to get Owen Tippett's a big get for them. I mean, it only adds to an already pretty significant forward group they have of young forwards, including guys like Bobby Brink and or young players in general, I guess, because Bobby Brink, Morgan Frost, guys like that. Um, but I think what it means more significantly for, I guess, value wise, yeah. What was it, two first round picks or just the one? I don't know why I'm asking. I can just look at it.
It was Tippett, a third, and a first.
Yeah, so I mean that's pretty much fair value from what I would think, honestly. The 50% retain, I think, is the big piece, and I think that's why it ended up only being a first and a third instead of like a first and a second, which you probably would have seen if Florida didn't need them to hold on to some of his salary.
Do you think so? We talk about Ben Sherratt, right? And I'm gonna be honest with you. The first round pick for Ben Sherratt, I think, is gonna really heavily come down to whether or not he signs. A lot of GMs nowadays are really, really hesitant to throw a first round pick at a rental player. Um, it's not something that you really typically see. Like, obviously, when it comes to a player like of the caliber of Claude Giroux, you're not gonna get him without a first round pick involved, right? Like,
I mean, in recent years, I would say more so than in the past. I think the draft has become such a significant portion of general managers' like projections for the next couple of years that like they try to hold on to as many of their draft picks as they can. Um, but I don't think you can really get away with not offering up a first round pick this year, specifically when, I mean, Tampa kind of set the market. They kind of rang the bell like on Wall Street for everybody and set the price at two first round picks for rentals, or not a rental, but two first round picks for players with contracts. So rentals are still going to be fetching a pretty high price.
yeah, I mean, like I said, you're not gonna get Claude Giroux without a first. Like, Philadelphia would have had to have been smoking something really strong to trade away Claude Giroux without getting a first round pick back, right?
Yeah, at least one.
Even though it's top 10 protected, you get a first round pick out of Claude Giroux. And I think that Claude Giroux, if Florida has the money for him, I don't really see a reason for him not to sign in Florida because they're one of the best teams in the NHL. They're clearly in a compete now, win now mode. And Claude Giroux is 34. He's not getting any younger. It's always that big question of how many more years at a high level do these players have left? And for Claude Giroux, having never won that Stanley Cup, now is the time. He really kind of even got a little bit of a late start on cup chasing, but that was also because Philadelphia was in this weird mode where like they were actually kind of good for a couple years and like then they weren't, and then so
Yeah, they went from getting a number 2 overall draft pick to being in the playoffs. It was a weird time in Philly, honestly.
So yeah, the time to chase the Stanley Cup for Claude Giroux and for Ben Sherratt, Ben Sherratt is 30 years old, is now. I think if Florida can swing it, I don't really know what their cap situation is off the top of my head. If they can swing it and keep both of them, I think they should look into that. Uh, but it's always a question of, can you really do that? Who really knows? Like Claude Giroux is probably, is he going to ask for another $8 million deal? Maybe. He might also take a discount if he thinks he can win a Stanley Cup with the Florida Panthers. He might take like a $6 million deal. If
Yeah,
if that's really what his
true.
mindset is at this point. Ben Sherratt's a little bit of a different question because Ben Sherratt's still 30, so he's a little bit younger, so he's still in kind of like his money making phase.
Yeah.
Um, I guess
I
the
mean,
ultimate question is, are the Florida Panthers now officially the team to beat in terms of Stanley Cup contenders?
I don't know if I'd go that far yet. When the Tampa Bay Lightning still have a pretty much intact roster. Or yeah, I said Tampa Bay, right? I didn't say that weird.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So when the Tampa Bay Lightning have a pretty much intact roster, I don't think they're the team to beat just yet. I mean, I think it's a title you have to earn, right? But it definitely puts them at the front of the conversation for the at least contender, right? Like it's not a question mark of like, is this team trying to compete or not? It's like, no, no, no. We're in this race. We're trying to win a Stanley Cup now.
I think this seals the deal on like their position in terms of a tier listing. I mean, in my mind, this makes them an absolute bona fide Stanley Cup contender. And it's not just because they're adding all these significant players. It's really just because I don't really look at this roster and see a significant hole anywhere. I mean, the
The only significant
goaltending.
hole is caused by injury.
Yeah, exactly. Like Aaron Ekblad going down obviously is an issue, but he could also be back for the playoffs, is what they're saying, right? So, the goaltending is fantastic. If Ekblad is healthy, and then you add Ekblad and Sherratt to that defense, I mean, Ekblad, Sherratt, Montour, Uyghur, Forsling, Gudis, and Hag as your seven, pretty good, pretty good. And we already talked about the forwards. The centers are great. The depth is great. They have the X factors with the grit. Sam Bennett, who
Sam Bennett's a
like
playoff performer, man. He lives for that.
yeah, like this guy just gets like the calendar flips to playoff season, and he just like is a whole other animal. They have the depth, the grit, the veteran leaderships from guys like Joe Thornton and now Claude Giroux. I mean, I
I
just
mean, Jumbo's been there, done that, right? Like he brings that at least 1,000 games of regular season of experience. And how many deep playoff runs did he go on, right?
he brings 186 games of playoff experience. So
There you go.
I think that there's really no holes on this roster. But let's talk about that other team in Florida that you mentioned, because the Tampa Bay Lightning also aren't sitting around doing nothing. They acquired Brandon Hagel, as well as 2 fourth-round picks from the Chicago Blackhawks in return for Taylor Radish, Boris Kachuk, a 2023 first and 2024 first, both of which are top 10 protected. Brenna Hagel, 23-year-old on the first year of a 3-year, $1.5 million deal. I know we've talked about this a little bit amongst our friend group. What do you think about the value on this one?
I mean, I think Tampa definitely overpaid a little here. Um, 2 first round picks. I know he's under contract for another, what, 2 years,
Mm-hmm.
but ah, see, I'm always iffy on buying high on guys who, what's it called, who are pretty much only in their breakout year right now, right? Like he isn't proven to do this again, so I'm a little weary of giving up 2 first round picks to get him. But I mean, to add a guy who's projected, who's looking like a consistent 20 goal scorer is never a bad thing, especially when your chief rival in your division's also in the middle of an arms race and adding big pieces.
Yeah, it is a lot. It definitely is a lot. I mean, Brandon Hagel, for what it's worth, this is really only his second full season in the National Hockey League. I mean, he played one game for the Blackhawks in 2019 and 2020. He played 52 games last year, 9 goals, 15 assists, 24 points. This is his first second real full campaign. He scored 21 goals, 16 assists, 37 points. I'm just a little weary on it. If nothing else, because, and you know how we feel about like advanced stats and fancy stuff, but when you look at like a lot of Brandon Hagel's advanced stats, he's been one of the more fortunate players in the NHL in terms of the goals that are crossing that goal line for him. I mean, I think we saw his shooting percentage was like 27% or something, like absolutely
Yeah.
ridiculous like that.
And I mean, not for nothing, and I'm not trying to take anything from the guy here, but you are riding shotgun with Patrick Kane and Alex DeBrincat, two of the best players in the league, you know? So, I mean, not to say that Tampa Bay can't just go, oh, he works really well playing with superstar players, copy, paste, put him right in between like Kucherov and Stamkos, but two first round picks for a guy who realistically is only benefiting from like a what do I say? Like I don't know the right word for it, right? But a situation like an advantageous position, I guess, right? Like he's been put in a fortunate position to be playing with superstars. So like I don't know if I'd pay two first round picks for a guy who's only gonna be able effective playing with superstars, you know?
Yeah, I mean, he's shooting at 22% this year, which is astronomical. And there is some other kind of things to take into account. He's under contract for 3 years, and when that contract is up, he's still going to be a restricted free agent. He's only 23, so the Lightning are going to have negotiating rights with him. But I mean, man, two first round picks is it's a lot. I mean, the Tampa Bay Lightning, sure, to them it doesn't mean anything because they're in win now mode, and when you have a team as good as the Tampa Bay Lightning, obviously you're not thinking about your first round picks. You really don't care, especially when you're in the good graces to have a lot of your team like relatively young. Vasilevsky's 27, Victor Hedman's only 31, Braden Point's 26. A lot of like your better players are still young. Kucherov's only 28. So like you realistically could try to ride this out for the next 5 to 7 years, right? So those
Yeah, I
first
mean,
round picks don't matter, but on paper, it's a lot. It really is, in my opinion. Uh, I don't know. Not to take anything away from Brandon Hagel, but when you can get Claude Giroux's 85 games of playoff experience versus Brandon Hagel's 109 career games, period, point blank, and 21 of his 30 career goals have come in this season, like if he ultimately ends up being just a third liner, traded two first round picks for a third liner, I don't know.
I mean, granted, they're probably gonna be later first round picks, so
Right.
say what you will about that, but the reality is like a first round pick's a first round pick. Like you don't you don't want to pay two first round picks for a third liner when you could have just drafted that third liner with those first round picks. You know what I mean? Like just a poor use of draft capital at that point, almost.
Yeah, and I mean the other thing about it too is those first round picks are how you turn a 5 year window into a 7 to 10 year window. Drafting young players while you're still competing, who then come up and replace older players who maybe get either too old or too expensive, is how you turn a short-lived sunburst into a longer-lived, efficient, playoff machine. Like look at the Pittsburgh Penguins, right? With in the Sidney Crosby era, winning in the early or the later part of the 2000s, and then also winning in the mid to late part of the 2010s because they had guys like Jake Gensel who were coming up, and I forget the defenseman whose name is escaping me right now, but Matt
Brian
Murray.
Dumoulin.
Yes, Brian Dumoulin. Thank you. Guys like Matt Murray and stuff like that. Like you can sustain yourself off of these things. Like I said, the Lightning are in a position where luckily a lot of their players are still pretty young, but in a vacuum, this trade is very much an overpay, and even in context, I still think is a little bit of an overpay because I don't really think the Lightning had like a much of a depth problem, in my opinion. I mean, it certainly helps, but I think like having third liners like Ross Colton, Corey Perry, Pierre Edward, Bellemare, Patrick Maroon, Matthew Joseph, like I don't know, it seems pretty good to me.
Yeah, I mean, and so the Rangers played Tampa Bay last night, right?
Yes.
And it happened to what's it called? He happened to be playing, right? It was his first game. And I'm not trying to pass judgment like it was only one his first game, he didn't freaking score a hat trick, Matt. But like for what it's worth, like he was stashed on the third line. And it's like, do you paid 2 first-round picks to stick this guy in your middle six instead of like in your top six? At least like the Rangers traded for Frank for Toronto and they're giving him a shot riding shotgun with Strome and Panarin. It's like, hey, we went out and got him. We might as well see what he can do because it can't be any worse than what, Dryden Hunt or Julian Gauthier are offering up there.
And you only paid for a fourth round pick.
Right, exactly. Like, it's just, I don't know, like, it just seems like kind of like a trade for the sake of making a trade. I realistically would have liked to have seen Tampa probably make a move for a defender before a forward, like another depth forward. Because I don't think, I mean, their defense seems to be a little weaker this year than it has in years past. But I don't know. It never hurts to add depth, but 2 first-round picks is a lot, man. A lot, a lot.
Yeah, I think this is partly a knee jerk reaction to because this trade happened before the Claude Giroux trade, but
Officially, technically, yeah.
yeah, but like we knew that basically Claude Giroux had been a Florida Panther for like 3 days at that point.
Well,
Uh,
Giroux played his 1,000th game in Philly, and like literally like as he hung his skate ups in that locker room that night, they had pretty much announced the trade and in most of its details.
yeah, he played his 1,000th game and then pieced out like real quick.
I mean, from what I understand, like we always say, right? These big deals for players like Claude Giroux don't come together over like one day,
Yeah,
right? So the fact that like it pretty much was all said and done after his 1,000th game leads me to believe the conversation between the Flyers and the Panthers essentially boiled down to, listen, we can get this done right now, like with a significant amount of time before his 1,000th game, we'll do it. But if he's creeping up on 1,000, he's playing 1,000 with us, and then we'll trade him because it's kind of just the right thing to do. You know what I mean? Like he's been
right.
here 13 or 15 years or whatever they said it was. Like he's earned the right to play his 1,000th game here and then get traded. You know?
And for what it's worth, Claude Giroux also had a say in that, right? Because he has a no move clause. So if he really wanted to, he could have refused to waive his no move clause until his 1,000th game and then done it. So
So what's interesting about that is, from what I understand, he pretty much said there were 4 teams in the mix, from what I read, and it was the Rangers, Boston, and then Colorado and Florida. And from what I understand, he pretty much said no to New York and Boston. Was like, no, 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 I want to go to Florida or Colorado, which I think is interesting. Not necessarily surprising, but definitely a little interesting because I think a lot of those teams are, or most of those teams are in similar situations.
um, I would say probably the reason he said no to the Rangers in Boston, if we ignore like any rivalry aspects of that, it's just because no offense to the Boston Bruins and the New York Rangers, it's just that like Florida and Colorado are kind of well, specifically Florida. Colorado, I have mixed opinions on, but like Florida is like in that bona fide Stanley Cup contender margin where I
Oh
think
yeah, no, I
Boston and
know
the
why you did
Rangers
it.
like fit into more of like
Like a bubble, like they have an outside shot at it if they get lucky.
yeah, and like honestly, if he was like 30 years old and the Rangers were still as good as they were, he probably would have came to the Rangers because like they're only getting better every year. But since he's already 34, it's like, listen, I maybe got like 3 or 4 years left. Like,
Like I gotta get while the getting's good, you know.
yeah, like,
Like while I still have a shot at this, as like
an
as
effective
like an
player.
actual player, yeah, and not just doing the, like cup chasing at like 40 something years old like Marty Brodeur was, where
Or
you're like a
like,
shell of yourself.
yeah, you know. I think that this is a great trade for both sides. The Flyers get to move on. from a beloved son, but get value out of him in return. Give their give their beloved son a chance to win, which he doesn't have in Philadelphia. It's a win-win in terms of that situation. They get good value out of it. Owen Tippett in a first. Um, you know, able to make some other smaller moves like Robert Haig for a sixth. I think Florida's loading up. I think Flyers are in a good spot in terms of if they are committing to this rebuild, this is a really solid first trade in that regard.
Well, I mean, to walk away with like essentially a blue chip prospect and a first round pick, doesn't get much better than that.
Yeah, and I mean, you could be worse, right? You could be the Tampa Bay Lightning who paid 2 first-round picks for Brennan Hagel, but I don't know.
I also want to say that trade's like that was a really smart trade on Chicago's part, just to realize that they have somebody and that the market's there, and to really look at it realistically and say the market is never going to be better than it is right now. We have to do this. You know what I mean? Like, because there was a little bit of controversy with the Brandon Hagel trade in the Chicago locker room specifically. Like, did you see what Jonathan Taves was saying afterwards?
Oh, he's like, oh, if he's not part of the rebuild, then who is? It's like,
Bro, do you have to put your foot in your mouth every time management does something? Like, I don't understand why you consistently are like sticking your thumb in the eye of the dude that's signing your check. Like, can you for once just be a good captain and just say the team's going like in this direction? So like he's like to even say things like I'm not informed. It's like, okay, yeah, I understand you kind of earned the right to be informed, but you're not always going to be informed as these things come together. Like the Brandon Hagel trade was a bidding war between like 3 or 4 teams, from what I understand too. So like the fact that Tampa probably anteed up and was like, well, we're going for 2 first-round picks, like you jump on that the second they offer it.
right,
So
yeah.
like if you're not going to be in the loop, you know, like. And if you didn't think Brendan Hagel was going to get traded after weeks of all these rumors, then like I don't know, like what sand are you burying your head in?
Also,
Like,
like, not for nothing, if you're admitting that the rebuild is on, isn't getting 2 first-round picks out of a guy who I'm not going to sit here and say he's a one-year wonder because he's only played 2 years. We don't really know. Like, he could very well turn into a 30-goal scorer, right? Or he could be a Matt Molson, right? Matt Molson had like 6 30-goal seasons with the New York Islanders or something, or 6 like 20-goal seasons with the New York Islanders or something like that because he was playing with John Tavares, right? P.A. Parento, same situation. P.A. Parento had like 3 back-to-back 60-point seasons because he was playing John Tavares. Both those players ended up leaving, and their careers fizzled out pretty shortly after. Wouldn't
Kyle
you like?
Okposo, same thing.
Right, like, wouldn't you want to get, like, if you're Jonathan Taves and you're like, well, we're going to rebuild, isn't getting 2 first-round picks for a guy who potentially could never again hit 20 goals pretty freaking good?
I mean, it's great, and like even if you look at it like mathematically, right? Like later first round picks tend to only hit at like 50%. I mean, shit, dude, you just got 2 50-50 shots at a player who's if not as good, or as good, if not better than the guy you just traded away. Like,
Yeah.
and you also just acquired 2 assets you can use to leverage to go out and acquire a bigger player, right? You could go to somebody like, I don't know, say for some reason, call it like Arizona's like Clayton Keller's shit, we're trading him. Boo. Like, you can make the call now because you have 3 first-round picks. You can be like, hey, do you want to make a deal for this? We have first-round picks for days, and they're not even ours, so we can trade them. We don't care. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and, look, Boris Kachuk and Taylor Radish, they're 23 years old, 24 years old, respectively. They're nothing special from what we understand, but even a guy like that, next year's trade deadline, right? Somebody needs depth. Apparently, the asking price for, third-line players, Brendan Hagel notwithstanding, generally we see, like, depth players going for seconds and thirds around this time of year. Maybe a first if there's an outstanding offer on the table, but you take Taylor Radish and Boris Kachuk, maybe you flip them next year at the trade deadline, you end up getting 2 third-round picks out of them. Now you just traded Brandon Hagel for 2 firsts and 2 thirds.
Exactly. And it only costs you 2 fourth-round picks and a player who wasn't in your long-term plan anyway.
Yeah, so I think this is good for the Blackhawks. I think if this is signaling something to us in terms of like, hey, I think actually, honestly, I don't even think it's that deep. I genuinely think, like what you said earlier, that the Tampa Bay Lightning came out there with 2 first-round picks, and they were like, all right, well, I can't not do this, right?
Like
Like,
I'll get fired if I say no to this, right? Like unless like this kid turns out to be like Connor McDavid, like there's no way I'm saying no to two first round picks. Like Claude Drew didn't even get two first round picks.
and our next trade, also didn't get two first round picks, and it's for a player who I think is criminally underrated. Uh, Hampus Lindholm and Cody Curran go to the Boston Bruins, and then Hampus Lindholm immediately turns around and signs an 8-year, $6.5 million contract extension. Lindholm is a 28-year-old defenseman. He was on the last year of a contract for John Moore, Urho Vakanainen, a first and 2 seconds. So it looks even better kind of in context when it's like, oh, Hampus Lindholm, one of like the top rated defensive defensemen in the NHL. You get a blue chipper in Vakanainen, a first and 2 seconds, as opposed to the Lightning, who are shelling out 2 firsts for a 23-year-old who like
may or may not ever do this again. Like who's literally just lightning in a bottle right now. Like you said, 23% shooting percentage is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Like Austin Matthews isn't even shooting at like 23%. Like
So Boston also loading up Hampus Lindholm. I'm only disappointed that Lindholm is going to the Bruins in one sense, in that he's not a right-hand defenseman like the New York Rangers are looking for. I thought Hampus Lindholm would have been an absolute banger deal for the New York Rangers. Obviously, I don't really know if they were in the market to be trading away the kind of assets that the Bruins had to shell out. I would assume the answer is no, but I mean, I'm happy for Hampus Lindholm because, I mean, I don't know about you. I don't know what you think about him. I think he's like one of the most criminally underrated defensemen in the entire National Hockey League. In my opinion, he's basically at the Adam Pelech of the Western Conference. Like this guy that is as good as they come on defense, and nobody cares.
I mean, I think the whole Anaheim Ducks defense for the last so many years has been pretty underrated. I think like that whole core group they have is really good, and like I'm glad to see a lot of them are getting a chance to go compete now, like Josh Manson and Hampus Lindholm. I don't know why I just forgot his name. We were just talking about him, but yeah, I mean this is a good get for the Bruins, right? The team that's been looking for help on the blue line for the last couple of years, they finally get what essentially is like a blue chipper out there. Like this was a big fish, you know.
And he's pretty much your typical Boston Bruins defenseman, right? He's not overly big, but he's 6'3". He's 208 pounds. Like he's no shrinking violet, right? He's a sturdy guy. He's reliable in his own zone. Like I said, I think he's so underrated. I think he's one of the best defensive defensemen in the entire NHL. And you're able to lock him up for 8 years at $6.5 million. He's only 28. Do the Bruins have another 8 years of competitive viability in them? Maybe, maybe not. I would wager more on the no side. But, the Ducks also get a really, really nice package out of this too. John Moore, who, he's 31. He's most likely going to be trade bait at next year's trade deadline, considering he'll be a UFA in 2024. So he's under contract for this year and next year. He'll probably be trade bait next year. Flip him for maybe like a second or third. But Urho Vakanainen is a 23-year-old, 6'1", 185-pound defenseman from Finland. He's been a pretty highly touted prospect for the Boston Bruins for a while.
He's been playing in their roster this year, hasn't he?
He's got 15 games this year with them. Like he's been bouncing between development leagues and the Bruins, but for a 23-year-old, that's nothing, out of the ordinary.
Especially a defenseman.
Yeah, exactly. I think this is a great trade for the or for both teams, really. What do you think about the value-wise going back between both teams?
I mean, this is just like a good old-fashioned hockey trade, right? Like, I think it's fair value. I don't think either team really fleeced the other one. I think everyone walks away from this pretty much addressing the needs that they felt they needed to. I mean, I think I'm surprised it was the asking price was seemingly so little, especially when they saw, 2 first-round picks flying around and everything involved with the Claude Giroux trade. But, I mean, if I'm Anaheim, I'm happy with the trade, and if I'm Boston, I'm ecstatic. I mean, like, this is exactly what they needed. I mean, he's the perfect guy to eat those big matchup minutes, big penalty killing minutes, and he's like built for the playoffs, right? Like a big stay-at-home defenseman. Exactly what the Boston Bruins need for the playoffs.
Does this move the needle on the Bruins at all from what they were before this trade, in your opinion?
I don't think so because I still think there's some depth issues they need to address up front, but it definitely pushes them a little closer. Pushes them maybe a little closer to the edge of like that bubble and into like the actual, contender window.
Yeah, I think I'm in the same boat. I think that the Bruins remain, in my opinion, a bubble Stanley Cup contender just in terms of like there are some holes that need to be addressed and there are some pieces that quite frankly just need to be better. But I think this is definitely a significant ad and it's something that they definitely wanted to get done and they boy howdy they got it done. um,
Here's the real question for you though. Do you
yeah,
think that because they went out and got him that they're out on Jacob Chikrin now?
I would assume so, especially after that contract extension.
Yeah.
Just because Jacob Chikrin is not gonna come cheap, like,
Oh no. Not in the least.
and the Boston Bruins at this point, uh, I don't think they have the capital that you would need because they don't have a first for this year. They do have their first for next year and the year after. They still have their second for this year, but they don't have a second for the year after. So, out of for the next 3 years, out of the 6 potential picks in the first 2 rounds, they only have half of them left. Um, I don't know that they really have any other prospects that would come up in a trade like that. From what I understand, most of their chips are on the table right now. So,
Yeah.
and like we said, Jacob Chikrin is 23 years old,
Yeah, he's going to be a big get. Like that's going to be a big package that has to go that way to get him.
and he's only making $4.6 million for this year and the next 3 years after that. Yeah,
Which is like almost criminal.
it's it's gonna take some serious leverage to get him, and I just don't think the Bruins physically have any enough
Assets
left.
left. Yeah. I don't think so either.
um, I guess we'll stay on the defenseman trade. There are some other smaller trades in the mix. Yeah, just mention them very quickly. Travis Hamonic goes to the Senators for a third-round pick. I think this is just the Senators kind of wanting to add some veterancy to their blue line. Maybe helps develop some of the younger guys. And this is also Vancouver saying like, well, look, we don't really have a need for Travis Hamonic. We're not making the playoffs here this year. Um, LA acquires Troy Stetcher from the Detroit Red Wings, just defensive depth. LA's been in on some other trades. From what we understand, they're trying to load up for the playoffs. Nick Delorier goes to the Wild from the Anaheim Ducks for a third-round pick. And Travis Dermott goes to the Canucks from the Leafs for a third-round pick. And so, like, the last big trade we'll talk about today, Mark Giordano. Yes, the
Inaugural captain of the Seattle Kraken.
is already. I don't know. I gotta be honest. I don't know why they named him captain when like this was so obviously gonna happen. But
I don't know
regardless,
why any expansion team would name a captain in like their early years. It's like you don't even know what this team is gonna look like in a year or two from now.
yeah. I mean, didn't wasn't Max Pacioretty only named a captain of like the Knights like a year or two ago?
He's not even the captain.
Or he's not
Mark
even.
Stone
Yeah,
is.
Mark Stone. Yeah. So
Yeah, he only got
Patrick.
it after being there a year or two. Yeah, they didn't name. He was the first captain in franchise history. I'm pretty sure.
So Mark Giordano goes to the Toronto Maple Leafs. Mark Giordano, along with Colin Blackwell. Giordano is a 38-year-old defenseman in the last year of a $6.75 million contract. The Kraken retain half of his salary, and they also get a second-round pick for this year, a second-round pick for next year, and a third-round pick from the Toronto Maple Leafs. I have a lot of opinions on this trade, but I want to hear yours first.
Well, I mean, if we're gonna start, we got to say the big get is obviously Colin Blackwell, right? Like this answers all the question the Maple Leafs needed, right? But no, seriously, this is just like this one has my head scratching my head because like the Leafs have been linked to Giordano over the last couple of days, and I was just like, why? I mean, it's not like Giordano's a bad player, right? He's not like a. It's not like you're adding an albatross or anything, but it doesn't really answer a lot of the questions that like need to be answered about this Leafs team. Like, can they defend or can they keep the puck out of their net? I guess the answer lately is no to both questions.
And this doesn't help at all. Period.
I mean, the guy's literally a power play quarterback. Like, it's been his whole career, right? Like, he's been a power play specialist.
You know, not for nothing, he's never been that amazing of a defender. Uh, and his plus minus has always kind of reflected that. Sure, the Calgary Flames weren't so good in some of these years, so you'll excuse his plus minus and some of that. But even some of the years that they were pretty okay, 2019, 2020, when they went to the playoffs, he was only a plus 2 that year. He was a plus 39 the year. He put up 74 points, but that's just because he was on the ice for so many goddamn points for. And that's not taking anything away from him. He's a great, solid offensive defenseman, but the offense is not the problem in Toronto. In fact, it's the least of your problems right now because your goaltending situation is actually dissolving before your very eyes. Like, you're literally watching Jack Campbell, who in his last 10 games has let in more than 4 goals, I think like 6 times or something like that. You're watching him fall apart at the seams. Then he gets hurt, and the Maple Leafs waived Peter Mrazek today. So what is your plan? Are you, because Eric Callaghan came in and put up a shutout in his first game and then won his second start, all of a sudden we're just going to pretend that our goaltending problems have been solved and everything is peachy keen and rose red? I mean, in his last 5 games, Peter Mrazek has Jack Campbell's let in 4-5-5-4-5. He hasn't had a save percentage over .867 in 5 games, and this is what we're worried about?
Yeah, bro, we got to score more goals.
My brain, like...
Kyle Dubas is playing just like 8th dimensional chess with us right now. Like, watch. But in reality, he's like actually just playing checkers.
Really, what Kyle Dubas is doing is he moved his pawn as far as he could get it, and then he's now attacking with his king. Like,
pretty much.
I don't get it, dude. For all of these players that have been traded, right? These defensive defensemen, these depth players, because the Toronto Maple Leafs actually kind of have a depth issue, right? These defensive defensemen, these depth players, these answers to problems. Not for nothing, Josh Manson, we didn't talk about that trade, but he's a solid defensive defenseman. He only went for Drew Helleson and a second-round pick. The last trade the Toronto Maple Leafs made was for Carter Hutton, and he's playing in the minors. My brain. I can't make heads or tails of this, and then not for nothing, the value going back the other way is horrendous. I mean, you're paid 2 seconds and a third for 1 year of Mark Giordano.
Sounds fair to me, bro. I don't know.
Like, wouldn't you rather pay Drew Helleson and a second for Josh Manson?
I mean, I would, but apparently I'm not like attuned to this like genius level thinking of Kyle Dubas. Like, my brain is just too small. Like, I just can't handle it, bro. He's blowing my mind.
For God's sakes, just trade for Travis Hamonic then.
I mean, if you're so hell-bent on overpaying for somebody, just call Montreal and overpay for Ben Sherratt. Like, what the hell? Like, if you are so hell-bent on making a big trade, then go out there and flex your muscles. Like, don't be like, yeah, we got Mark Giordano, because everyone's like gonna clown you because it's like, wow, you went out and got the one guy you didn't need. I mean, especially when Marc-Andre Fleury is being like, I don't know, like they're essentially giving it to teams with a gift wrap on it. Like, please take him. We need value out of this. We fucked up. And Toronto's like, both my goaltenders aren't playing well. We got a rookie that's playing semi okay right now. Yeah, we're gonna take Mark Giordano. Fuck Marc-Andre Fleury.
I mean, there's other names on the board. Uh, Calvin DeHaan is on the board. Brett Kulak, Andy Green. Some solid defensive defensemen there.
If you really want to pay for an over the hill defenseman, bro, Zdeno Chara is probably like cheap as shit. Like, you know?
Yeah, I mean he wouldn't solve their problems anyway, but that's
No,
maybe
but
they don't know that.
I mean, listen, like if they're going out there trading for Mark Giordano, then clearly like solving their problems is the least of their worries.
I mean, Andy Green, solid. He's old, but he's solid, and you probably really don't have to pay like a third. Like,
Yeah, see, but that would make too much sense.
and look, granted, I don't really know what the goaltending trade situation is outside of Marc Andre Fleury, but like, then just go get Marc Andre Fleury. Like, it literally cannot get any worse than it is right now because Jack Campbell has gone from brick wall to tissue paper in a matter of a month. Peter Mrazek was basically AFK from the start, never connected to the server, and
Then you waive him, which is like, oh,
well, now you're stuck with that contract because guess what, Buttercup? He's still under contract for 2 more years.
and then you look at Freddie Anderson, who's just like thriving in fucking
In
in
Carolina.
Carolina, and you're like, huh, he really wasn't the problem. It's like, yeah, no, he really wasn't the problem. I told you that last year. I don't know why you went out and got Peter Mrazek.
You want to hear something that's going to make you even angrier because it made me like irrationally angry to the point where like I needed to walk away for a second.
Oh boy.
The Edmonton Oilers are also apparently completely out of the goaltending market at this point. And it's like,
Really?
bruh, like, please just. I guarantee you, Chicago will retain half of Marc Andre Fleury's salary, and you only have to pay them like a third round pick.
I mean, they're desperately trying to get rid of him, not even like for the contract reasons. They're trying to dump him because they need to get value out of that because they went out and traded for him. So now Chicago's like, oh God, we actually have to get any value we can out of this. So like, I don't know why teams aren't taking advantage of it. The only team that seems to be so far linked to it is Vegas, and it's like, bro, what are you doing? Like,
The only
you,
reason Vegas makes sense is if Robin Leonard's injury is season ending.
yeah, but even still, it's like, why? That's like slapping your girlfriend in the face and breaking up with her, and then calling her a week later, being like, yo, what's up? Like, they're like, you drove him out of town. He did nothing but like leave his blood, sweat, and tears on the ice for you, and then you spit in his face. Why would he want to come back? Like, it's almost disrespectful even calling Chicago to see if because he has a no trade clause. So it's disrespectful even to like see if he's remotely interested in coming back to Vegas. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's like I wouldn't. I mean, there's just like you're telling me that you haven't kicked tires on like any of the other goalies that are floating around in the market, that you have to go back to Marc Andre Fleury, who you ran out of town. Like, you haven't talked to like the Vancouver Canucks about, I don't know, Yaroslav Halak, who's on a 1 year deal, or like Detroit. You haven't talked to them about like Thomas Greiss, who's on a 1 year deal. Hell, if you're gonna pay second and 2/3, why at that point not see if you could just overpay the Rangers for Alexander Georgiev, who I don't think they would trade him anyway, but you could still at least ask.
I mean, yeah, at least kick the tires on it.
Like, Semyon Varlamov has been rumored to have been on the market for a little bit. He has a modified no trade clause. He wouldn't waive his no trade clause to go to Edmonton. That was reported, so like they were out on him obviously, but I mean there's just so many other options that you can do to improve your team. There are veteran defensive defensemen on the trade block like Andy Green, Daniel Chara, clearly, you know, some of these other players, Calvin DeHaan, are on the trade block. There are some other veteran goalies that are realistically, yes, you don't really trade for goalies midseason, but like trading for a goalie of their caliber is not going to be something crazy. I mean, you can't tell me that like this was the best you could do. If this is the best you can do, and I'm talking to Kyle Dubas and I'm also talking to Ken Holland at this point, after the offseason we had, with how many goalies were available last offseason, with how many goalies were moving around last offseason, if this is the best you can do, you should be fired. Like, immediately. Like, not even before the season ends, not even, like, in the offseason.
Like, right now.
When you called the ownership and said, hey, guys, just traded for Mark Giordano, boom, second and 2/3. They should have had a old school style like paper boy, like paper buy your paper for a nickel, like sprinting into your office with just a big pink slip on it that says get the fuck out. Like,
yeah, I mean, God. And then to go out and be like, yeah, we're not in the goalie market either.
Like, what is wrong with you people? Edmonton, please.
It's like, just do something. Do anything that isn't this.
You can't honestly tell me, as the Edmonton Oilers, okay, you cannot look me in the eye and tell me that you are comfortable heading into the playoffs with Mike Smith and Mikko Koskinen. You can't. Because you'd be lying to me, you'd be lying to yourself, you'd be lying to your wife, you'd be lying to everybody in the room. All right? There's no universe in which that is something you're okay with.
I mean, it's just like, not like...
And like, what are you going to do? You're going to go into the offseason and see what goalies are available? Okay, sure. Maybe at that point, you know, you could trade for...
strike out on all of them again?
Right. Like, you could maybe trade for like Alexander Georgiev or whatever. But based on your track record for the last 2 seasons, I don't have any faith that you're actually going to do that.
Seemingly not, right? Like, you just keep bringing back fucking Mike Smith. They're like, yo, this is the Mike Smith show. Like, that's all we got.
The Mike Smith show should have been canceled after its first season.
Like, I don't even think it should have made it through its first season, to be honest with you.
Obviously, the trade deadline is not over yet, but when the beat reporters are saying the Edmonton Oilers are pretty much out,
they're pretty much out. Like, it's over.
It's not looking good, and it just frustrates me to no end. So, are there any other things or trades you want to talk about last second before we wrap up here?
I don't think so.
So, like I said, you know, keep in mind, guys, this is being recorded on this Sunday. So the trade deadline is obviously Monday. So after the trade deadline, we'll probably be doing our episode, you know, usual Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, somewhere in that range. So in that sense, just keep in mind this is pre-recorded, and then we'll be doing a full trade deadline wrap-up for the other trades that come through the pipeline after the fact. So keep that in mind. And yes, you know, I feel like we do beat the dead horse sometimes with the Leafs and Oilers, but it bears repeating because I actually physically get stupider every time I think about the things that these teams do. And it's coming from a place of genuine frustration because I want to see guys like Austin Matthews, Mitch Marner, and Connor McDavid go deep into playoffs because I want to watch more of them play, but I don't get to do that because the teams are poo-poo doo-doo caca. So, yeah, just keep that in mind. Anyway, enough ranting. I'm going to friggin' blow goddamn blood vessels in my forehead.
Just blow a gasket.
Literally going to end up looking like Peyton Manning if I keep thinking about this nonsense. In order to rationalize what the Leafs and Oilers do, you have to have a forehead the size of Peyton Manning just for all the mental gymnastics you have to do.
Honestly, yeah.
So thank you guys for watching, and then we will talk to you guys again next time.